Hey everybody, welcome. I'm Rina. We'll get started in one more minute. In the meantime, hi all. Lauren, thanks so much for introducing yourself. I also love hikes and yoga. Go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat if you feel comfortable doing so, and we'll start in 1 minute. So welcome to everybody. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody. My name is Rina and I'm an instructor with Manhattan Prep. I teach the GRE and the LSAT. And I started teaching the GRE here many years ago. I actually started as an LSAT teacher and then I moved into the GRE. And I love working with students on both the quant and the verbal side of the test and helping my students achieve their goals. So it's great to meet you all. And tonight we're going to be doing a verbal lesson and we're going to be focusing on the fill in the blank questions. So text completion and sentence equivalence. And we're going to treat them kind of similarly because our focus is going to be on using punctuation as a clue tonight as we think about these questions. So I'm going to go ahead and screen share a slide deck and we're going to dive in. So give me one moment to get that screen share going. All right, here we are. So as I said, we're going to be looking at, oops, I put in two S's there instead of as, but punctuation as a clue, looking at fill in the blank verbal. And as I said, I'm Rina. I like to use the chat in these sessions, so keep that chat open as well. And I'll ask you guys to chime in with questions as we go. So the questions that we're going to see tonight are from two sources. So one is the Manhattan Prep GRE book, a 5-pound book of problems. And you might already have this book. If you don't, I really recommend it. It is a huge book. It's actually a 6-pound book. So it's even bigger than 5 pounds. It's a book of lots and lots of practice questions. So that's where I've pulled some of our questions for tonight from. The other place that I've pulled questions from are from the ETS website. And the ETS, that's the company that makes the GRE. They actually have a lot of great resources on their website too, free resources that I recommend checking out. So I pulled some sample questions from there as well. So our agenda for tonight, I'm going to introduce this question type and the process overall for approaching them. And then we're going to dive into thinking about using punctuation as a clue. Punctuation is often like a hidden clue that is easy to miss when you're doing these questions. So I want to spotlight punctuation tonight as a clue. And then we'll do a conclusion with a Q&A, and you guys might have questions about your individual setting that you want to ask. So I'll leave time for that at the end. Okay, so my slide deck is weirdly advancing multiple slides instead of going one at a time. So I might bop a little bit, but I'm going to show you guys an example question to begin with, just to sample one of these questions so you can see what they look like. And then we're going to talk about the process for them. But starting with a sample question, I'm going to give you guys 1 minute for this. I'm going to pull up my timer, 1 minute, and I want you to chat me your answer when you have it and send in the chat. You can send to everybody or to just hosts and panelists. Just send it to hosts and panelists, then just I will see it. Here's the question, and I've got my timer going for 1 minute. Go for it. All right, that was about a minute. I'm seeing some answers flowing in. If you haven't sent me your answer yet, go ahead and do so that I can get a sense of where you guys are. So I'm using this question as an example to illustrate the question type. For these questions, you're going to get a sentence or a paragraph with 1, 2, or 3 blanks. Here we just have 1 blank, and your task is to fill in the blank with the right vocabulary word. Sometimes you're going to have to fill the vocabulary word twice, like you're picking 2 similar words, like 2 as close as synonyms as possible to fill in the blank. In this case, though, we're just taking 1 word here. And our task is to read the sentence, think about the meaning of the sentence. And I'm going to say this explicitly in a moment, but like come up with our own word for the blank. Think like, okay, what do we want to fill this with? And then match it to the answer choices. Now, our right answer in this case is apportioned. This is our right answer. So let's look back at the text to see some clues. So in Europe, football, AKA soccer, it is the most popular sport. Whereas is an important keyword here indicating we're going to have some contrast. So I love pasta, whereas my brother loves steak. You know, we're having some contrast here. So football, widely popular in the United States, fandom is fairly evenly, we could say like divided among a few different sports. That could be the word I fill in. So I want to contrast this idea of like one sport getting the big share of popularity, contrast that with like this even spread of popularity. So if I look at my answer choices, one really tempting wrong answer choice is measured. Measured is a very, very close but no cigar answer choice. So our fandom, though, it's not exactly measured, it is spread out. And apportioned just fits a little bit better here. Apportioned means allocated or divided. It means like given portion, we could like apportion a pie to cut up the slices to make sure everybody gets some. So it's more about dividing out among a group of people than the act of measurement itself. So apportioned is our right answer here. Okay, I don't want to dwell too much on this question here, though. I'm using it as just an illustration of the question type. And I want to now make explicit what our process is for these questions. There are 4 key steps. The first step is to read the sentence, the whole sentence and nothing but the sentence. Notice that I don't say read the answer choices. So you don't want to start with the answer choices. And in fact, you want to pause before you go to the answer choices to do step 2. Which is to use the clues to predict your own words for the blanks. And this is really important and valuable so that you're knowing what you're looking for in the answers before you get there, and you're not anchored by these really tempting wrong answers that they throw in there that look good or are on topic and things like that. You want to like go in with a really clear sense of the meaning of the sentence. Then you want to compare your fill into the answers and then confirm your answer with the proof in the text. Now, when you're going to predict the word, you're using clues. Now, I used whereas as an important clue. So you're looking at these sort of signals here, like, am I looking for contrast? Am I looking for agreement, disagreement? And then you're going to use clues from there. So I'm contrasting this idea of one popular sport. So let's do another example. And this time we're going to put into practice this process here. So I'm going to show you just the sentence first. And what I want you to do, and I know I don't have it up on the slide yet, but I'm just going to type this up here. I want you to chat to me, just to me. So chat to me your fill in for the blank. So before we look at the answers, I want you to send me your fill in for the blank. Okay, here it is. So take a moment and read and send me your fill in. Awesome. I'm seeing some great fill-ins coming in. So some of the words that I'm seeing, let me type them up here. I'm seeing aesthetic, I'm seeing beauty, I'm seeing appearance, and then type to everybody, what are the clues for your fill in? So type to everybody, what are the main clues in this sentence here that you're seeing? Lauren, love it. Literally the word beauty, right? So one thing I like to think about in, right, we're basing it on the beauty. One thing I like to think about when we're coming up with fill-ins is to be uncreative. So who was it that had sent beauty before? That was, to give a shout out, that was Jimmy, right? Like Jimmy said beauty, that's awesome, right? Like we can just repeat words from the text. And that way, you know, you're not straying too far, right? You want to stay as close to the text as possible. And in fact, repeating words is a great way to do that. Let me show you guys the answers. I'll give you just 20 seconds of the answers. So we've got our predictions. Here are the answers. Yes, exactly. Aesthetics is our answer. KY070810 exclamation point. Don't know. I doubt that's your given name. Don't know your name, but exactly, right? Like we predicted it and it turned out to be literally there. So nice work on predicting that. Aesthetics is the right answer. So we're using clues to predict an answer. Then and only then we're going to the answer choices. Now I want to start to talk about punctuation as a great clue to use, and the GRE loves to use punctuation as a clue. So I want to start with colons, which I think, in my humble anecdotal opinion, is the most popular punctuation clue on the GRE. I've seen it so many times. It's a really important clue. So to begin, what does a colon do? I've given an example sentence here using a colon. So type to everybody, type to everyone, what does a colon do? We can use this as an example. What does it do? Love that, Ramil, right? Okay, great. Define, explain further, separate ideas, listings. Okay, I want to highlight our top two, explain further and define. I think those are really spot on here. It continues what came before. And in fact, it defines what came before. So here, exactly, right? It gives a further explanation. One way I like to think about it, I substitute like, after all, ... That can be a good like substitute for a colon. Like the report was shocking. After all, it detailed a vast web of financial crimes, blah, 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 right? Okay, so it connects what could be two separate sentences when the second sentence, the second part, summarizes, sharpens, or explains the first. And it is a very important agreement clue. So anytime you see a colon on one of these sentences, I want it to like spotlight out to you that we're not going to be doing a contrast here. We're going to be looking for agreement. So let me give you a sample question here. And I want you to read, come up with your own fill in for the blank, then look to the answers. And in fact, here, maybe what I'll do is I'll cover up the answers to start with, and then I'll show you the answers. So I'm going to pull up the question, I'm going to cover up the answers, and your task for this first one is going to be just to read and come up with the fill in, and then I'll show you the answers. Okay, here it is. Quickly covering the answers. Whoops. Oh no. Give me 1 second. LOL. Okay. Got to be better prepared here on my, okay, my white boxing. Okay, here we go. Let's do this one. Oh, sorry. Okay, there we go. Thanks for bearing with me there. Okay, 1 minute to read, come up with a fill-in, send to me your fill-in. Great fill-ins, keep them coming. Okay, so good. So I'm seeing things like short-sighted, secluded, ignorant, naive, unaware. And this is a great, and this one is a real GRE question that I got from their website, which is retired former questions. This is a real question. It's a great example of how they use the colon, where it's like, hey, here's a blank. I'm about to define the blank. I'm literally going to define it, right? People didn't know much about what was outside of their own borders, right? They weren't aware. They were secluded, right? So they're defining the blank for you here. Okay, here are the answers. Send me your answer when you've got it. Awesome. So our right answer here is indeed insular, meaning very secluded, like inward looking. We're siphoned off in our own universe. Cosmopolitan is a tempting wrong answer choice in that it is the opposite of what we're looking for. Okay, so someone's asking, what do you do if you don't know the meaning of some of the words? Such a great question, right? So part of the challenge for this kind of question is knowing what the sentence is saying, but the other challenge is knowing the answer choices. So I like to think about a couple of symbols to use as you're going through the answers. So I like to write, so this is my paper. I'm gonna write on my paper, A, B, C, D, E, and I am going to use these symbols as I go. So I'm going to use on my paper, I'm gonna mark X if I know the word and know it's wrong. I'm going to keep going, but I will mark a check if I'm like, I know the word and I think it's right. And then two other important notes here are, or two other important symbols are squiggle, which means I know the word and it could fit, you know, like doesn't seem perfect, but it's a maybe. And last but not least, and you got to know what you know and know what you don't know, I'm going to put a question mark when I don't know the word. And I don't want to talk myself into thinking I know a word I don't know. I really want to be honest with myself if I don't know the word. So if I'm down to, for example, let's say I'm down to something like this, where I'm like, hey, I don't know what insular means, but let's say I know what erudite means. And erudite, by the way, means very like scholarly, knowledgeable. And I've crossed off everything else, right? So I'm down to a squiggle and a question mark. And the squiggle, I'm like, that could fit, but it's not. Like, I'm a little bit talking myself into it. I'm going to pick the question mark. So in the GRE, you got to be down to pick words you don't know if none of the other ones seem to fit and you know them. The other thing you got to do is study your vocab. So vocab studying is very, very important. There's lots of great apps, including the Manhattan Prep app that you can use to study vocabulary. So like cosmopolitan, for example, I like to think of like the Cosmo cocktail, you know, and that's like a drink that you might drink in the city of Manhattan, in a big city, and cosmopolitan means like, oh, you're like comfortable in cities all over the world. You can be in the whole cosmos. In fact, like I like to think about the cosmos as like the universe. Like you're comfortable in all kinds of environments and all kinds of cities, right? So you want to be learning these words and using flashcards, but also like trying to come up with ways to remember them. Okay, let's do another example here of another sentence with a colon. And this time I won't cover up the answers. I just want you to look through, do the process yourself, and then send me your answers when you have them. Okay, here it is. Awesome. Okay, I'm seeing lots of great answers coming in. So I want to start by highlighting Deepika, who sent me some great fill-ins. So thank you so much, Deepika, for that. So filling in the plug-in words that Deepika chose were success and violent, which are really, really good words here, right? So Deepika's following the advice of being uncreative, right? And repeating words, could not handle success. So we have our colon. Our colon is going to define can't handle success, right? So the more success, repeating the word, the more can't handle it, the more violent his life became, right? So again, repeating the word of violence here. So uncreative and building on, and in fact, defining this idea of not handling success. Now, our second blank, I'm looking at my answers. So I'm going to start there. Second blank, tumultuous. I'm thinking tumult. I'm like, ooh, everything's topsy-turvy. I'm like, ooh, that sounds pretty good. So I'm going to squiggle that one. Providential, maybe I'm like, not sure what that means. And dispassionate, I'm like, ooh, not passionate. Dis, that opposite prefix, right? So like not, so not passionate, meaning like cool, detached, maybe like uninterested. That doesn't seem right. So I'm going to cross that out. Now, tumultuous, I was like, hey, that sounded pretty good. So I'm going to pick tumultuous, and indeed tumultuous is our right answer. Providential, by the way, means it can mean coming at a good time. So like good timing or lucky. And it also can mean prophetic, like seeing into the future. So if something is like from God, you know, so maybe it's a providential, I'm thinking of like the city of Providence, and you're going to move there in your future. And that's my prophecy, is that you're going to move to Providence. That's providential, right? You're going to have a lot of luck when you go there in the future. So providential is not a right answer. Then maybe I go to my first blank, and tumultuous is the right answer for this blank. The first blank, temperance, I'm going to tell you guys, is not the answer. Temperance means moderation. Carpaccio is not moderate. He's vain and prone to violence, right? Temperance, you know, you eat a moderate amount, you drink a moderate amount. You might know from American history, there was the temperance movement where that was the movement to ban alcohol, right? So we want to stay away from all these vices. So someone who has a lot of temperance stays away from vices of excess, right? Then notoriety and eminence, geez, right? Like notoriety means like, okay, sort of like famous, renowned, but doesn't eminence also mean like very famous? So how do I pick? How to pick between notoriety and eminence? Now I'm going to tell you guys that our right answer here is notoriety, but I would love for you to type into the chat to everybody. So to everyone, why notoriety over eminence? And you can answer that either with, so type to everybody, why notoriety over eminence? That could either be like why notoriety is good, or why maybe eminence isn't quite as good of a fit. So for or against, but why is notoriety the right answer and eminence isn't for this first blank? Fantastic. Right? Okay, so notoriety is more about fame, and eminence is used to refer, RNCA, I really like to say of doing this, of like godly power fame, or it's like a positive fame. Someone who's really eminent in their field is like really respected. So this is kind of like, you're a big deal, right? So it's a very positive fame. It connotes respect. It can connote almost godliness, but not always. Someone could be eminent in their career as well, but it's like big respect, big props to this person, but we're thinking more negative, and notoriety can be more of a negative fame. So these subtle connotations matter here as well. Okay, so to summarize so far, we're using the colon as a clue. We're defining what came before. We're defining could not handle a success. Then we're going to our answers. We're using what we know and what we don't know to make eliminations. And then we want to get to the subtle connotations. Yes, great. So Lily's asking, is notoriety a noun for notorious? It totally is. These are connected words, right? So notorious person might be like notorious for their crimes or something like that, right? It's not totally positive in the same way. Like it could be spun in a positive aspect, but it doesn't have that same big respect and positive connotations that eminence has. Okay, great work, guys. So again, we're really highlighting, like when we see that colon, we're thinking agreement, we're defining what came before. Let's see another example. Here it is. Great. Okay, so lots of answers flowing in here. If you haven't sent me yet, go ahead and do so. We have, so let's look at our colon to begin. So what the word we're defining is this idea that he understood the power structures right away, using the administration to his advantage. So maybe we could say he's like savvy or clever. So we're defining, we're having a word that can be defined by like, hey, understanding very quickly and using things to his advantage. Then for our first blank, we're not as much in relation to the colon. Instead, we're describing this idea of novice. So someone who's new, right? Not knowing stuff, and it's contrasting savvy and clever. So far from this newbie that he made himself out to be, he was in fact opposite, right? So we're contrasting savvy and clever, we're agreeing with novice. So perhaps something like unknowing or bumbling, something like that. So I'm going to my answers now. Cunning, that's so tempting, but that's what I'm looking for the second blank. Second blank, cunning would be a great answer, but for the first blank, we want the opposite of that. So cunning is an opposite answer, cunning meaning like clever, using things to your own ends, right? Like getting your way in sort of sneaky and clever ways, but that's for the second blank. Guileless is actually the right answer. I'll come back to that. Capricious means following every whim. You're going everywhere. I think of capricious like a curly Q is how I envision capricious of like, oh, I'm going to follow this spiral and that spiral. It's not right. Guileless, that means maybe naive. It means artless. You're not suspicious in any way. And I think of like guiltless is one way I try to remember guileless. It's like, oh, I have this light conscience. What? There's bad things in the world, right? Like, so a little bit naive. Guileless is our right answer. Our right answer for our second blank is canny. And canny means essentially, clever. And that is our right answer. Unseemly means impolite, not really following our codes of conduct here. And desultory means like, ooh, topsy-turvy, everywhere things are in a chaotic heap. And I think of it as like, see how there's the word story hidden in desultory? S-T-O-R-Y. It's like a story that has some chaos thrown into it. The story has been thrown into chaos, and that's what desultory means. Things are chaotic, things are haphazard, things are all over the place. So our answers here are guileless and canny. So we're agreeing with understanding everything and then contrasting that in the first blank. Let's see one more colon one, and then we're going to see some other punctuations. But here is one more example, and this is a long one. So now we're getting into the long one. Actually, let me say before that we see the long one. I'll double check that, Elizabeth, and I'll confirm. But maybe you're right. Sometimes I make mistakes too, but I'll confirm. I'll do that while you guys are working this next one. For these long ones, I recommend when you're faced with a long one, read the whole paragraph first. So read the whole thing, get a sense of the story overall. So treat it almost like a mini reading comprehension. So you're looking for the story, then go back and think about the individual blanks. So read for the forest first and then go for the trees. So read the whole thing, so think about what's the overall story, then go back and fill in the blanks. Here it is. Okay, great. And I've got some great fill-ins here from you guys too that I pulled from the chat. The third one was like, hey, hard to fill in my own word for, right? Because it's a whole phrase. But so our overall story here is, hey, this author, okay, there's politics, we're writing about the planet. This author is aware of disputes, but the author doesn't permit those disputes maybe to enter in or shadow too much this description, right? So instead of these disputes, he's focusing on actually describing what do we know. So he's emphasizing the gaps, the sparseness, something else that we don't know, right? So he's emphasizing, hey, there's so much we don't know, so much that must be better understood before we can come to some final conclusion. So maybe here, I don't know exactly what goes in, but I want to continue this idea of what we don't know, right? What we don't know. Author's like, hey, there's so much that's missing, what we don't know. So we don't want the facts to are clouded by politics. Overshadowed here is the right answer. Invalidated is really tempting, right? Because we don't want them to get too in conflict, but invalidated is a little bit too strong. So invalidated means like completely like made to be wrong. And the author is like still acknowledging these are facts, but the author just doesn't want them to be distracted by politics. So invalidated in the right direction, but it's too extreme. And in general, we want to be wary when we see extreme language and make sure it's supported by the text. Illuminated is actually the opposite of what we're looking for. We don't want politics to shadow the facts instead of illuminate them. So it's the opposite. So also tempting, but in the opposite direction. So, right, so there's human effects on the climate. The author does not permit them to change the description of what we know. So doesn't permit them to, again, kind of shadow them. Our right answer here is obscure. Doesn't permit all of these big disputes to overshadow this comprehensive description. Enhance would mean make even bigger, but the author's like, hey, here's all these things we don't know, right? Look at all these things that we need to figure out before we can fully diagnose. Enhance and underscore are also very similar answers, both meaning like emphasize. So when both are very, very similar, also it's a good clue that the third one's wrong. Our last one here, we want to be in line with this series of ideas of gaps in knowledge, sparseness of observations, right? The author is being critical of all these things we don't know. So superficiality of our theories is our right answer for this last one. We want to be in line with this idea of all of these empty spaces. Questions about this one? If you have a question, go ahead and type it into everybody. I got a lot of different answers here, so feel free to put in a question. You might be in good company if you're not sure about anything. So I'll take a moment and see if any questions come in. Awesome. Okay, so Elizabeth asked if we're going over quantitative. We are not. We're just doing verbal. And I'll go back to your desultory comment in a second. So just verbal for tonight. Lily asks, doesn't underscore mean weak? Actually, underscore means emphasize. It's kind of like underline, Lily. So it's actually the opposite of that. I just also wanted to briefly go back to this one here. Elizabeth had messaged me and said, wait, I thought desultory means half-hearted. And Elizabeth, you are totally right, but it has both meanings. So I was saying it's like haphazard, all over the place, a little chaotic. So it also means arbitrary and haphazard. So one example is like desultory comments. It's like would be a conversation where everyone was saying a different random thing, but another definition that I hadn't noted before. So thank you so much, Elizabeth. Is half-hearted or done in kind of like a slow and sluggish and not with a lot of energy manner. So thank you for that as well, Elizabeth. Okay, and someone else is asking, would you recommend for a 3 fill in the blank to skip because they are longer? Not necessarily. I think with every question type, there are easier and harder versions of them. So I would read all the questions first before you decide if you're going to skip. Ones that I think tend to take longer and have a lower percentage of people getting right are questions that are reading comprehension ones that are like, each of the following is true except. Those questions actually have like a very low percentage of folks getting them right. And they take a long time because you have to like eliminate all the 4 wrong answer choices. So that's one that I would be wary of. Another one that I would be wary of is those questions that are choose all that apply. So you can't do process of elimination. Each answer choice you have to separately evaluate whether you think it's right or wrong. Those also take longer and have a lower percentage of folks getting them right. So those are ones I would be skeptical of. I actually wouldn't be skeptical of 3 blankers because those can be easier or harder. It just really depends on the 3 blanker. I want to see some more examples, but you guys are sending in some great questions. So maybe I'll pause another moment here. What other questions do you guys have about any of the stuff we saw so far here? This question type, verbal section in general. Happy to answer other questions before we see some other questions here as well. All right, let's keep going a little bit. So I want to look at M dashes. So M dashes are long dashes. They're different than N dashes, which are shorter dashes. So here's two examples. So take a moment just to read the two examples. And M dashes can great, right? So Ramila is saying connectivity. They have a couple of different roles they can play. They're a bit versatile. Some uses to look out for on the GRE. So they can be in place of commas or parentheses. And the first example that I have here is an example of that. It's offsetting descriptive or modifying information, right? It's not like the heart of the sentence, but it's like, hey, here's like a little aside with some additional information. And they can be used like colons, like in the second example, it's introducing, explanatory, summarizing, or concluding information. And just like the colon, it's an important agreement clue. So I'm going to give you guys an example of a question with an M dash here, and I'll give you guys about a minute and 30 seconds and send me your answers when you have it. Oh, and note for this one, I've highlighted this at the top, but this is our different fill in the blank question type where you want to pick two answers that produce equivalent to sentences. So two answers for this one. Okay, go for it. Awesome. Several people have sent me the fill in quiet. I'm going to add that to the slide here and then compare it to the answers. That's a great fill in. Awesome. So here we have M dashes like the sort of offsetting of information, but we're also giving more explanation, right? Their personalities are so different. Let me tell you all the ways. She was ebullient when he was glum. Relaxed or he was awkward. Garrulous, which means talkative, when he was quiet or not talkative. So we're illustrating all these ideas of different. Our two right answers here, good matches for quiet, are laconic and taciturn. For taciturn, I think of like tacit agreement is when you nod, it's silent agreement. So taciturn means very quiet. Laconic, there's a couple ways you can remember, but I like to think of a lake. At the lake, it's hopefully very quiet if I'm at a lake. I'm there to relax. So laconic and taciturn are our answers. Let's see one more that uses dashes here. Here it is. And for this one, there's just one right answer. Great fill in there, Deepika. Captivity is really good. And note, we're just looking for one answer for this one. Great, another great fill in here, ownership. All right, nice, guys. So, right, so again, this M dash in this case is kind of like, and the M dash is the long dash. By the way, they're called M dashes because they are this length of an M, like the letter M. N dashes, the shorter dashes, are the length of an N, like the letter N, like noodle, you know, it's a shorter letter. Okay, so we are here, we're defining what came before, we're defining the contrary notion. So we're defining the contrary notion, that's in contrast with freedom of the seas. So we're going to say, okay, we're defining something that's contrary to that. So the captivity of the seas or the ownership of the seas. Two answers that I saw a lot of, I'm glad you thought that was cool, thanks, are conservation and appropriation. Our right answer here is appropriation, which means taking for your own use. So that's more in line with this idea of like, oh, I'm owning it for my own national security and profit, like sort of secluding it off for yourself. So like if you appropriate parts of the budget, you're like setting it aside just for parties, you know, if you're, or whatever, you know, so it's secluding something for a specific or personal use. Conservation means like, you know, saving, preserving. So it's similar in that it's like maybe more conservative than like, oh, everything here and there, more careful, but it doesn't quite have this idea of being free from any proprietary claims of nations, right? So no nation can claim this. It's a little bit different than that. Okay, so appropriation is our right answer. Last but not least, I want to briefly look at commas. So here are two examples. Take a moment just to read. And commas, you know, as you probably know just from your own individual reading and writing and doing these questions, right? It indicates a pause in the text, it separates clauses, it indicates a relationship between these two things. You know, maybe they're in a list, maybe they're being put side by side, a relationship, but it can be of agreement or disagreement. They can indicate many kinds of relationships. So it's a little hinge in the text that shows like, oh, I'm looking at two different elements here. I'm looking at two different clauses, but it doesn't immediately reveal what that relationship is in the way that colons do reveal, we're going to agree, these two sides. The M dash reveals, we're going to agree, these two sides of what's on the text. The comma, on the other hand, we want to look for other clues to tell if it's agreement or disagreement around this hinge here. So here we've got just like for friends, showing, hey, this hinge is showing agreement, but on this first example, while shows we're going to disagree across this hinge. So I'm going to show you guys, let's just do, just for the sake of time, you know what, I'm going to skip the two examples. We've seen a lot of examples because I want to leave time for your individual questions at the end. You guys have, I'm sure, seen lots of questions with commas, and I just want to give a brief summary here. So colons indicate agreement, what follows defines what precedes it. M dashes indicate agreement. Commas are really important to note. They're a hinge that's showing a relationship, but it can be agreement or disagreement here. Okay, that is my summary. And also, by the way, so we do these free prep hours every month. We do usually 2 a month, sometimes 1 a month, and we try to alternate quant and verbal, just FYI. So the next one I leave will probably be a quant one in the next month. But I'm going to turn off my screen sharing and just hop on and answer any questions that you guys have. And thank you guys so much for being here and participating. Now, Elizabeth had asked earlier, let me scroll up to your question. And yeah, put in other questions as they go. Elizabeth, you were asking about tips for reading comprehension. And thank you guys to everybody. Actually, Elizabeth, can you put in again what more specifically your question is on reading comprehension? And then I'm happy to share. Oh, and I should say to everybody, if you are all set, go ahead, and it's so great to meet you all and enjoy your evening. And if you have questions, you know, I'll stick around, but otherwise, thank you guys so much and great to meet you all. Okay, so Jimmy asks, in the real GRE, how much time is given in each essay? Great, you have 30 minutes per essay and it's an hour total is the answer. Succinct. And Elizabeth, I'll wait on what your more specific reading comprehension question was. I can't remember. There were a lot of comments. Okay. Okay, so Elizabeth says, I find that the reading comprehension section questions takes a lot of time to digest. I end up rereading several times. Tips on managing time. Okay, really good question. I have a couple of thoughts. So one thought is, you might already be doing this, but I think it's very important as you go to take notes, and a specific kind of note. I think there's a kind of note that you're taking that's very passive, where you're just sort of writing down the words that you see on the screen, and that doesn't increase comprehension. So instead, what I want you to try, if you're not already doing this, and then I'll give some other suggestions too, because you might already be doing this, is after every few sentences, and at the very least after every paragraph, to pause and summarize in your own words what you think you read. And a good practice, actually, you may not have time for this on test day, but good for practice, is to take a short note after every sentence. And that really focuses, that act of rephrasing it in your own word and synthesizing it means that you will reread it fewer times, because you're actually taking the time to comprehend it in the moment. So taking notes that actually synthesize and rephrase what's going on, or like drawing a picture, but doing some act of translation where you're not just like copying down a jargon word. And start with practicing after every sentence, and then sort of increase to once a paragraph. Another suggestion is actually at the beginning and overall in life. So something that's been shown actually in studies to improve people's reading comprehension score is mindfulness and deep breathing, and taking even 10 minutes a day to meditate. There was a study of doing meditation 10 minutes a day for, I forget how many times a week, and it actually improved people's reading comprehension, just because they were on the GRE specifically, because they were able to focus more. So I know it's not for everybody, but if you feel comfortable trying to integrate, before the test, or sort of in the mornings generally, sort of pausing and sitting and noticing your breath, and maybe counting to 10 over and over again. There's different ways of practicing mindfulness, but it can really actually improve people's focus in the moment, so you're not rereading as much. Those are two tips that I have. And feel free to like chime in, anybody else also, with other tips that you have. Oh, actually, I have one other thought before I say it. So the other thought is, everybody, right? We all are more invested in things that we care about. Like I'll carefully read things and comprehend better stuff that I'm actually interested in. So trying to convince yourself to be interested in the passages, it can be easier said than done, but that is actually really a good way to make it. You'd be like, wow, I'm learning something new. So one of my colleagues tells his students, so I'm telling you, but I'm blaming it on him, to smile at the passages, because the physiological act of smiling, it like a little bit like the physical action convinces your brain to be like, oh my God, I'm happy right now, I'm interested. And like just trying to trick yourself into being interested can go a long way for actually comprehension. Okay, so then Lauren asked, how to get excited? Oh, geez. Okay, well, the smiling one actually fits well for that. Other thoughts on that? Well, one thing for the verbal section is these are all real passages from like newspapers and academic texts. So you are actually learning new things. Like all of the things in it are like true, real things. So that is one thing, is like think about, hey, I'm actually learning. And I would say just try to approach studying for the GRE as a chance to learn, of like, hey, these math questions, like, sure, it's a means to an end of getting the score. Can I also treat it as a moment to like be like, whoa, I'm learning something different about fractions that I didn't learn in high school. And for me, that actually helped me a lot in my studies. Like for me, like the math section in particular, I hadn't done math in so long. Like I went to art school. I was like, actually, there's a chance for me to learn something and to like feel better at math. And that helped me a lot to like think of it as a chance to actually be learning. Okay, Deepika is, what should we do to improve vocab and grasp more GRE words? So you should be aiming to learn 30 to 50 new words per week, as like, that's like ambitious, that's good. And more than that, you're not really going to retain. So you're aiming for 30 to 50 per week. The flashcard is the classic tool, and it is the best tool to use. And have them be like sticky, interesting flashcards. Either there's a lot of great ones out there, but also you can make them that have like synonyms and antonyms and example sentences, uses of the word. So make like interesting flashcards. And then for words that you're really struggling to stick with, I would suggest like write little short stories or sentences that use those words in action, and like star in those paragraphs, like people you really love or people you really hate, or things that you really have strong emotions about. And emotion helps encode things into our memory. So tying the words to things that you feel strongly about is a great way to keep learning them. Thanks, Lauren. That's so sweet. Okay, do review section. Yes, so we do, we just try to cover a range of topics. And honestly, Lily, at this point, there have been like a billion pre-prep hours. So always trying to think of new topics, but on YouTube are also all the recordings of the past ones. So you can find, we'll still do some more in the future, but also you can find a lot of reading comprehension sessions in the past one as well. If you look at our YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much. Okay, thanks for being such great, awesome students. Any last questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any more come in. So good night, everybody. So good to see you all. Until next time. Bye-bye.